Hello everyone, welcome to this lecture on regional language newspapers in India. This lecture is part of your paper on news and society. In this module, you will learn the growth and development of the regional news media in India. This will help you to understand the significance of regional language in India's story in communication studies. This module will first draw a brief socio-historical background of the growth of regional language newspaper and its relevance in communication studies. News media include print media, that is newspapers and news magazines. Broadcast media includes, that is television and radio, and more recently internet, that is online newspaper and news blogging. The main focus of the news media is to deliver news to the public, that is the masses. Regional news media refers to the news media in different languages of the country. In this module, we will be discussing primarily Hindi news media. You will learn the relevance of news media and in specific regional language newspaper and its role in the present day, where media has an extensive role to play in society. This module will also bring a significant understanding of types of regional news media and its increasing popularity. During the period of late 18th century and early 19th century, press was the medium for transmission of social and political messages. It also played an influential role during the independence movement. Post-independence media was dominated by English language press. Hindi language papers were not given much attention. In 1954, the domination of English newspapers was first noted by the First Press Commission. While analyzing the state of press after independence, this domination of English press continued till date 1970s. During early 80s, the gap between the readership of English and Hindi newspapers widened. In the year 1952, the circulation of English newspapers was 6,97,000 copies for 41 dailies, and circulation of Hindi press was 3,79,000 copies for 76 dailies. In the year 2011, the circulation of English newspaper was 27.36 million copies, while the circulation of Hindi press was 88.95 million copies. In India, the sale of Hindi language newspaper exceeded 40 million a day and had increased by more than 65% between 2000 and 2007. The impact of this disparity is the vernacular Hindi language newspaper cannot be ignored. As Robin Jeffrey states, the primary reason for the expansion of Hindi print media was due to increasing rate of literacy. The economic story of India was rising, hence the purchasing potential of the common man was increased. Also, along with this, the economic development, methods of communication improved. This led to increasing popularity of the print media. All this led to revolution in the rural population of the Hindi belt of India, where this enabled a more literate population and a more politically aware rural population who was interested in increasing participation and role in the development of the region. This also led to increased level of consumerism in the rural market. As per Registrar of Newspaper of India in 2010-2011 data from the annual statements, the highest number of newspapers were published in Hindi, that is 7,910, followed by English 1,406, Urdu 938, Gujarati 761, Telugu 603, Marathi 521, Bengali 472, Tamil 272 and Oriya 245, Kannada 200 and Malayalam is 192. The data clearly reflects the growth and expansion of regional newspaper in India. While Hindi newspaper was leading in terms of circulation, other regional newspaper was no far behind. The post-independence era has seen a revolution of regional language newspapers in India. The trajectory of growth of Hindi newspaper is interesting. It was felt that with economic reforms in 1990 and growing information technology newspaper, that is print medium, would show a decline. Remarkably, India story is different. It is during this period print medium expanded. This indicates the increasing role of newspaper in the life of Aam Aadmi, common man. Also, it reflects that more and more population are literate enough to read, hence increasing publication of newspaper. In turn, this has led to political awareness amongst the masses, which was previously regulated to the elites who could read. Newspapers are no longer isolated in urban India. It has reached the nooks and corners of remote areas of northern India too. This is in turn has led to expansion of the public sphere. 79 in her book Headlines from the Hindi Heartland too reflects on the same. Hindi as a print medium in newspaper is a relatively later phenomenon. It has come much later than the English medium. But what is most interesting is that even after its late inception, the Hindi newspaper story of growth is exponential. These implications of the same are very interesting. As Robin Jeffrey notes, Arvind Rajagopal's in 2001 split public that India is split between an elite that reads English and public that reads Hindi. this rise of Hindi newspapers since late 1970s and early 80s posed a challenge to the dominance of English language newspaper in the public sphere. Interestingly, during this period, there was a decline in Congress and rise in regional consciousness in which regional press played a very important role. Regional press began to align with regional political class to provide support to the regional cause. The regional and local space, which was inadequately represented by the English press, was captured by this press. The Congress was able to co-opt the regional agenda into its national programs. The English press, also known as national press, failed to provide adequate representation for regional and local voices. Rudolph and Rudolph have argued that since 1965 there has been a rise in demand politics where voters' sovereignty is paramount, which is expressed through elections and through the demands of organized interests and classes, political parties, social movements and agitational politics. A turning point in the regional news media is the Ayodhya movement. During the late 1980s, the claim of the English paper as the nation press that would speak on behalf of the nation had already come under scrutiny. It was the Hindi press that spearheaded the movement, and the English press largely responded to what was being reported by the Hindi press. Thus, the growth of the Hindi newspaper was accompanied by a major transformation in Indian society and politics. On the other hand, there was significant transformation taking place among the Indian society. The growing literacy, improved transportation and information and communication revolution created increased demand for newspapers. India is unique. Its process of democratic depending has taken place despite low level of economic development. While most of the neighboring countries have authoritarian rule and military dictatorship. This newspaper started from the idea and motto of Ram Mohan Lohia that you do not move, you move the world. Based on this premise, this newspaper functions and calls itself not a newspaper, it is a movement. The newspaper practices this ideology too. Since its inception, it has sincerely and single-mindedly worked towards the formation and the development of the state of Jharkhand. It ranks 7th position amongst all India. India's number 1 and number 2 Hindi daily being Dainik Jagran and Dainik Bhaskar respectively. There were few turning points in the history and growth of this newspaper based on the views of the editor himself. One important incident in the early 1990s forged the identity of Prabhat Khabar. The Press Council wrote a sternly worded report about this phenomenon, exposing 6 big Hindi newspapers. For our part, in Prabhat Khabar, we were publishing the correct information that only 6 people died in the Ayodhya dispute. With the help of our old friend who was the editor of the Lucknow Navbharat Times and of the BBC team which had been present there. The other was in 1992-93, our newspaper published several investigative reports on the cattle fodder scam. Prabhat Khabar had a leading role in exposing this scam. Later on, various big and famous newspapers of the country gave the credit to Prabhat Khabar for being the first to expose this scam. Also, in the early part of the 1990s, news about starvation deaths started coming out from the Palamau area. The newspaper used the power of journalism to fight on the side of the people suffering from hunger. The experience of getting involved in social issues empowered Prabhat Khabar, and such power of strength cannot be obtained from market publicity or by giving gifts. In 2002, Prabhat Khabar again published news about deaths due to starvation in a village belonging to the Palamau area. Although the government admitted that relief work had not been carried out here, it refused to acknowledge the fact that people had died of starvation. According to the official version, people died of various illnesses. Prabhat Khabar published whatever was told by the government very prominently, but it also sent its correspondent to these regions for a period of 10 days. These areas were not the ones visited by the government representatives, and the paper continued to publish reports of starvation deaths. At last, the Jharkhand government wrote a threatening letter to Prabhat Khabar on the ground that it was publishing inaccurate information. Till that time, the other newspapers were either silent on the issue or they simply published the government version of events. The above few events reflect the turning point in the trajectory of growth of the newspaper. This particular Hindi newspaper published news with regard to Ayodhya movement, fodder scam or starvation deaths in a very neutral and objective manner, for which this small newspaper was criticized. Later on, the truth was realized and Prabhat Khabar newspaper was appreciated for holding on to its facts. This newspaper has always worked on the principle that it's not only a newspaper, but it's also a movement. It has been extremely challenging for Hindi news media in the face of severe competition from advertisements and marketing, but it has withheld these challenges by keeping a strong vigil on its content. Localization of news has been the priority of this newspaper. This newspaper has focused on the local news as headlines for the paper by highlighting on corruption issues like fodder scam and starvation deaths in Palamau, it has put on center stage the local news. Selectiveness of news and localization of news has been the core strength of this newspaper despite severe challenges. Summing up, the module clearly illustrates increasing growth of regional newspapers in India. Hindi news media have come to occupy a dominant position in globalizing India. Hindi newspaper have reconfigured itself and adapted their content by appropriating the language of modernity once exclusively claimed by English language newspapers. The Hindi news media, by using Western technology and adhering the indigenous cultural values and resources, Hindi newspaper have provided hybrid content to their readers in a hyper competitive media environment. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. For more details, please read the module carefully and attempt the questions at the end. Thank you.